All right. Welcome back, everybody, to another future-focused weekly update where we are keeping you 10 steps ahead at the intersection of business, tech, and the human experience. I'm your host, Christopher Lind, and looking forward to getting into this. If you're a regular listener, watcher, thank you for your continued support and engagement. If you're new to it, I hope you find this helpful to all of you. If you have things that come across your desk or that you're curious thoughts, or if you're curious what my thought, what if I've seen it, please share it. I'm always interested when I get things from other folks, but I will run down that. And if you find value in this, would you please share it with a friend, tell somebody about it, give it a like, do all those social fun things. It means a lot when you do. So thank you for that. As usual, when we get into it today, I've got 5 things that have been on my mind recently that I will be talking through, and we'll see how much time it takes to go through them. I will try and stay tight as usual, but we'll see. It's my show. I can do whatever I want. All right. So the first one came across my desk. I had watched an interview, and I honestly, if people follow up, if you're really curious about these things, you can ask, and I'll try and get the specific citations from these things or the articles that came across my desk. But usually they're kind of a mix of things. So this first one was sparked by an interview I watched where it was between 2 tech leaders, and one's a very well-known person in the tech space. And he was talking about how there are some, so I want to be careful how I represent this. There are some people in the AI tech space who really are looking at building God with AI. And there's actually a whole term with this. It's called Robotheism, where the whole goal is it's almost this Messiah complex where it's like we're going to build the technology that saves humanity, and it's going to answer all our questions and solve all our problems. And, it's going to be this great, fantastic thing, and it's going to almost become a new deity. Now, depending on where people sit and how you land on all the definitions for some of the terminology, you may be like, we're never going to get there. And again, it's not a matter of whether we will or we won't. It's a matter of what some people might do and the effect it has. Because I think sometimes when people hear this thought, Robotheism, they imagine, I don't know what, but when I hear when I dug into some of the Reddit threads or some of the articles related to this, some people kind of scoff at it because they have this imagination of like people going and worshiping a humanoid robot. And I get where that's almost comical. And I think sometimes conservatives can paint, this whole, they're reading the book of Revelation and reading into it that, these machines are going to take over and are going to worship at the altar of OpenAI. And I just don't think that stuff is helpful. But what was interesting listening to this is hearing from somebody who's on the inside. And I've actually been in conversations on some of these advisory board meetings where they won't directly say that's what they're looking to do. Honestly, most people, if you're hard pressed, if you're like, are you trying to make AI God? They'll say, no, absolutely not. But when you hear the way they talk about it and AI's potential and its capability to serve us at this ultimate level, that's exactly what they're doing. That's how they're thinking about it, whether they're thinking about it in those terms or not. And so it was interesting watching this interview. And so they got into the discussion, do you think any of that? And the person that they were interviewing definitely didn't. And I would I would very much share his approach to it, which is it's technology, it's an enabler, it can help us do anything, but we're not going to create anything that supersedes us because it's built on us. And if you've followed me for long, where my worldview is. For me, it's not possible. But it is a real thing, and it is rising, and it's not necessarily new. In doing some of my research related to this, I came across, there was a Polish church that started. It was literally called the Way of the Future Church. It started in Poland, I think, something like that. And it really was back in 2017, and it was the worship of AI. So truly almost that caricature that I described that a lot of people would go, well, then now that's just kind of like strange. But that has happened even going back to 2017. So it's weird, and it's also real, and it's very real. And I think it's bigger than just thinking about whether you're going to bow at the altar of AI or not. But it was interesting because Bill Gates even spoke into this, and I listened to the clip from him, and he even Yeah, he positioned it as a way like we're going to need new religion or philosophy to navigate the what's going to come as a result of AI. And what I think was interesting is, that got positioned as, oh, Bill Gates is saying AI is going to become a god. And I've watched enough of his stuff and I've listened to him before. I think if he were pressed on that, I don't know that he would directly come out and say it. But what was interesting in listening to that quote, it was similar to what I said before, where I think a lot of people go, nah, that's ridiculous. But then when you listen to how they describe AI, that is how they're thinking about AI. It is going to be the thing that solves everything. And that is, to me, a concerning trend that I'm seeing. And not just, yes, obviously the extreme version of, literal traditional liturgy type stuff around AI, but even this idea that AI can save you and it will be the solution to all our problems. And that personally is something that I think is much more common. And so what I think is interesting about this is people are starting to attribute that to Robo-Theism. To me, I almost see this as, well, I suppose in some ways, if you're looking at religion as this cheap veneer or this kind of genie, you go ask for things and it gives you what you want, or it just has all the answers that you don't have the answers to, and it's smarter than you. Like if that is what you truly think God is, a deity is, to me, that's a very cheap definition of what a deity is. And so I'm like, well, boy, if that's your definition of deity, then I guess, yeah, I can see where people would start to see AI as a god in that cheap kind of veneer sense of, yeah, I guess you ask it what you want and you get what you want, and it has a lot of knowledge and information that it can spit out at you, and it can sound really smart, and it can influence you, and it can, if you're willing, take care of things for you. I mean, I guess, but I don't know. And I think that's where a lot of times when I've got into more, and what I do agree with Bill Gates is I do think AI, and I was actually on a podcast with an atheist where we were talking about this, because his question was, do you think with the rise of AI, things like, and he bucketed a bunch of religions together and just said, do you think AI is going to prove all these things wrong? And I was like, well, no, because ultimately all it's doing is looking at everything we've done before and then coming up with different solutions. And so my point with that is, what I think Bill Gates is getting at, that it is going to challenge us to think more about the nature of divinity, which I think is true. It's going to force us to go, well, even to people who would claim to be Christian or Muslim or whatever, I do think it is going to force you to go, what does that really mean to you? Because if it is nothing more than, cheap wisdom and, the ability to take care of some problems for you, I mean, then I guess, yeah, you could swap AI out for it. But if that's all religion is to you, I don't know that religion is actually adding any value. And I don't know that you've truly understood what divinity is. And I don't think you've experienced that on that level. And so I do think Bill Gates is right, that I think some of this stuff, and even on the podcast that I was on where we got into this, I did talk about the fact that, yeah, I do think there are going to be some things that AI is going to challenge in us. I think there are going to be some things that we thought we understood that we realize we didn't really understand that well. And I think that's where it's going to put us in this position of, well, so then are you going to look to AI to be your savior? Or is it just going to challenge maybe some of the things that should have been challenged in your life that you just really haven't ever had anything push you in that direction? And I think that actually can be a really healthy thing. And I think, some of that deconstruction that I think AI is going to bring is actually probably a good thing. I think there are some assumptions that people have about religion, some things that they believe, that AI is probably going to go, whoa, boy, man, we now are able to see and do things that we've never thought before. And we're going to have, but that's not new. And I think that's the part that we're on this evolutionary journey as we figure this out, because I just think back, and maybe it's because I study history a lot, but I think about like ancient civilizations and the fact that they really would have had no concept of space the way we do today. They just wouldn't have thought about it. And I think, even later times when we discovered atoms and molecules and we discovered the complexity of things that before we didn't have the chance to do, and how for some people that made them go, oh my goodness. And I'll use an example. Let's talk creation. Okay. How was the earth created? There were some people who, as more archaeological things and all this stuff started coming out, all of a sudden they were faced with this challenge, and they went, and by the way, I'm not trying to argue one way or the other with this, but my point is there were some people who were suddenly faced with things and they had to go, now what do I do with this? And there are some people who just went, well, I'm just going to choose to ignore and deny that this exists so I can hold on to what's over here. And then there were other ones who went, well, if holding on to that is what religion is, then I have to abandon the religion. And the unfortunate part to me is I don't think that's what the path that you have to take. And I think that's kind of the concern I have with the rise of this whole kind of divinity complex with AI is we're starting to put our faith and our hope and our trust in something because we believe it's revealing something new to us that somehow is in conflict with what we have known for a long time. And so now we go, well, I guess that means we have to retire or sunset this because we've now somehow been enlightened by AI. I'm like, what? I think that's a false dichotomy. And I can just say, because I've shared where my worldview is, I actually think one of my best resources for how I navigate and think about the complexities and the philosophical challenges that we're dealing with AI and all of this technology stuff is the Bible. Like, I actually think there's so much wisdom to help that is timeless and transcends all of the innovations and the changes of the world. And so to me, when I think and look about this, I don't see AI all of a sudden needing to replace or sunset God. To me, it's just like, I really struggle with it. So actually, when I listen to this interview and I've talked to some people who maybe are further along the spectrum of like, yeah, AI is going to save us. I talked to somebody the other day who's like, it just in a few more years, we're not even going to have to worry about death anymore. And I'm like, you think AI is going to cure mortality? Like, in my book, there's only one cure for that, and it's not something that we built in a lab. So it's going to be interesting to see. But the challenge I would put to people, and I think this is the challenge for folks, is I would fully prepare that AI and some of the things that are going to happen, the future that's ahead of us, I think we're going through a major transformation, and it is probably going to present you with things that you are uncomfortable with or challenge, potentially things you've always held to, and all this stuff. And what I've often seen is people are very uncomfortable digging into that. And as a result, they either completely reject, true deconstructionism, where it's just like, I am abandoning everything I ever thought before, and I've now adopted this new thing, or there's complete denial. And there's this tendency to fall into these two camps instead of deconstruct it and say, what do we really know about what is timeless? And now how do we reconstruct this in a new way? And that's a large part of what I try and do with this podcast, is dig into some of these things. The one last week where I talked about conflict and AI's role in that. Well, you can jump in the camp of, oh, conflict is bad, so I'm just going to use AI to deal with it. Well, that's not good. But you can also go, oh, AI is bad and I don't like it, and it's challenging what I thought I knew about conflict and how to think about others. And so I'm just going to avoid and hold AI at arm's length and stay over here with what I'm comfortable with. I'm like, well, that's not healthy either. I think you need to deconstruct it. And so, regardless of your religious affiliation, I think you do have to actually dig into, well, where is your hope really placed? What do you actually look to God for if you believe in God? Like, what do you, how is it a genie? Is it something you just go rub a lamp when you want something and expect it to deliver? Is it something that's, a cosmic rule book that dropped in your lap that tells you the things you can and can't do? I mean, if that's really all it is, I think you're missing out on it. But also, I think you need to actually wrestle through that challenge and go, boy, what does that mean? Because now AI is starting to disrupt some of this stuff, and I'm going to have to actually think about it. So it's going to be interesting to watch. Do I think there's going to be do I anticipate like an outbreak of churches like the Polish one, the Church of the Future, that I actually wish I had spent a little more time before recording this, actually looking into like, what is their like statement of faith? Like, what do they, I actually am really curious, like, what does that even look like? And how do you worship AI? It's very interesting to me. Do I think we're suddenly going to start seeing churches close or religious institutions close and be replaced with AI? No, despite some of the apocalyptic folks who think that that's like what I don't think we're going to see that. But I think what we are seeing more and more of is people putting their hope and their trust in AI. And that to me is concerning. And I think it's a trend that, I think it can slip into your life very easily without you realizing it, because you're reacting to a caricature of what you think it is. So, I don't know. I'm curious for folks out there if you've seen other examples of this, or if you have details on some of the ones who really have gone the caricature route, but also your reactions to kind of what do you think AI is going to do to religion as it stands today. Personally, I think my personal take is, if you truly have tapped into what I think religion really is intended for, AI is not going to shake anything. But that's probably a much deeper conversation that I'm not going to have in my weekly update. So anyway, but I thought it was really interesting hearing different perspectives. And like I said, I do think Bill Gates is correct in that it is going to challenge some of our religious and philosophical ways of thinking. And it is going to force us to have to look at things that maybe we've just taken for granted or haven't had to think about. We just prefer not to think about it. Okay, so then let's move on to number 2. There was some research that came out both from, I can't remember where it was. I think it was at John Hopkins. John Hopkins University had trained. So there's 2 parts to this. First, Elon Musk, regardless of what you think about Elon or not, he has some big things that he often says about things. And he's notorious for saying this stuff. And he came out saying that, it's not going to be long before doctors and lawyers and all these advanced fields are completely surpassed by AI. AI is just going to be able to do all of this stuff. And then another example I came across, that if you are already buying into this idea that like AI, which actually ties to the first point of this idea that like AI is just going to solve all our problems, it's going to fix everything, it's going to reach divine status. And I don't think you have to go that far to even start to buy into some of this. Like AI is going to replace doctors and lawyers and all this stuff. So Elon went on the record doing this. And then John Hopkins actually trained a AI. I'm not going to get into the details of their actual model and what they did. But basically, they had AI watch a ton of surgeries. Okay. Tons and tons and tons and tons of surgeries, like massive amounts of data. And then they had a robot perform the tasks like needle manipulation, lifting of tissue, the actual suturing of things. And this is where headlines, be careful what you see in the headlines. The headlines say AI did just as good, if not better, than people. And so you can see these kind of headlines and you can hear statements from Elon Musk that is like, aha, see, AI is going to just leave us in the dust. And but it was interesting digging deeper into it. And again, taking Elon's quotes about, it's going to replace doctors and lawyers. If I had an opportunity to sit down, I'd go, what do you actually know about what a doctor and a lawyer does? Because I was on a live stream today talking about this, where one of the biggest challenges, and this is not in my list of things, but I came across a study recently that was talking about this, and I guess I did mention this, but companies are being really slow to adopt AI. So this is a little preview to the next one. And one of the reasons is the data is just not there. Now, where this ties to the doctors and lawyers is, I think we assume we know a lot about what doctors, lawyers, these advanced practices do. And so you can train an AI robot on how to look at a medical scan, how to suture up a wound, how to make an incision. And you can go, see, AI did it, and it did it perfectly. And I look at that and I go, well, duh. It's an extremely repeatable robotic task. And if you assume that that's all a doctor does, we'll stick with the doctor example. If you assume that all a doctor does is make incisions, move tissue, look at x-rays, and sew people up, you don't really understand what a doctor does. Now, to be fair, are there instances where tragically doctors are in environments where that literally is all that they have time to do? Of course. Of course. So might you say some of these AI capabilities have the ability to sunset or eliminate some of the needs for doctors to do this stuff? Yes. And is it possible that AI could do it better or more effective than a human? Sure. I have no doubt that that is the case. But as I look at Elon's quote and this data from John Hopkins on what they trained AI to do, digging into this study of what they trained it to do, they were very simple, basic, repeatable tasks. There wasn't a lot of variance in what it could do. And again, I know the people who will push back on this will go, well, if you had enough data, then AI would be able to figure out all the possible options of what it might have to do. And it's like, well, if you're following the AI models, no, actually, I don't think the data supports that. AI is really struggling to move into some of this complexity and to be able to adapt and pivot and think outside the box. It does not handle that well. And I know the folks who, again, going back to the first point, probably are in the Messiah complex of AI. It's just a matter of time. Just a matter of time and training data, and it's just a day. I personally don't think we're ever going to see that. Now, going back to the same first point I made, is it going to challenge what is a doctor? Yes. Is it going to challenge what is a lawyer? Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you are a doctor who has built your career on making incisions and moving tissue, if you're the incision guy or gal, like, okay, watch out. And to be fair, I was at GE Healthcare when AI really started picking up back in, the days when deep learning was really starting to take off. And we were already seeing early signs that AI was better at detecting cancer and other things in scans. And that is very disruptive to a doctor who maybe has built a whole practice on, I look at your scans. And so can it be very uncomfortable to have to go, boy, if that's what I did, I'm going to have to deconstruct what I did. But what I think we're going to discover with this, and this is what I'm seeing companies are continuing to struggle with, is there's so much more that we don't fully understand. And there is so much more that people are doing that just goes overlooked. And there's not really data that can even be explained in how you do it. And I know last week I talked about the rise of large behavioral models, which might that fill additional gaps? Yeah, probably. We might get better at predicting some of these things or have more human interactions with the machines. But I just think these hyperbolic statements that like AI will surpass doctors and lawyers in a matter of years, like we just don't understand what it is. And I'm actually excited. Honestly, I saw the John Hopkins research. I was ecstatic. I go, man, you know what? I would much rather, not yet, but if I'm having a routine procedure and I meet all of the routine criteria, I honestly, to some degree, would rather have a robot go in and take care of it with a very seasoned expert at the hands who knows what to do if something goes sideways. I would much rather have that. And you know what? It opens the possibility that that routine procedure now that I might have, I might be able to have a world-renowned physician who would never have the time, or I'd never have the money to actually oversee that procedure, now see it because maybe they don't need to be there anymore. They can see it from wherever they are and make sure everything goes okay. So do I think it's going to challenge what a doctor is and what a lawyer is? Yeah, I know that already because I think about even some of the things I'm doing on the independent consulting side. Am I necessarily going to a lawyer for every legal document that I need written up? No. Am I taking care of some of that and then having a lawyer review it and double check and say, is there anything I'm missing or not thinking about, tweaks that you would make? Well, yeah. And do I have some people in my portfolio that I go, yeah, I pull on them for certain things because they're the experts and I'm not going to trust AI in everything? Sure. So I think this is more what we're going to see, which ties to point 3. So point 3 was an article I read that was actually an interview with a manager at Microsoft. So he was a software engineer who does a ton of work at Microsoft, and his job is to write code. Which last week, if you listened, I think it was last week or the week before, I talked about how Google's bragging that AI is writing 25% of new code. And I went, I'd love to see how you're measuring that. But reading this article was interesting because it kind of validated what I was hinting at there, in that his whole point of view on this was, yes, AI is doing a large amount of my coding now, and I am no less busy than I was before. And in digging into our interview and him sharing kind of what he's doing and how he's spending his time, it was really interesting hearing exactly how he's relocated his time. He's able to meet tighter deadlines. He's moving his timelines forward. One of the things I didn't think he shared enough of, and I think this is one of the biggest risks of AI, is he did talk more about how he's just speeding everything up and performing more, which is very much one of the big things people are talking about AI right now. Oh, look how much more we can do. Look how much faster we can do it. And I think there's room for that. I think the part that we also need to consider that I don't think this article brought to light as much was there are things that you weren't doing before that AI can free up your time to be able to do. Now, even going back to the doctor example with this, I would much rather have a physician who is deeply engaged with me as a patient, can take the time to help me understand the procedure I'm about to have done and work with me on, my plan for recovery and all this stuff, and be able to be fully engaged and commit that time to that, because they're able to, have a robot take care of the actual procedure and they can better use that time for something else. They can go spend that quality time with another patient while the robot does the surgery, and they can quickly rush to the ER if something goes sideways. Like, great. That I think gets missed in some of this. And it was missed in this entrepreneur article about, the Microsoft manager who is still super busy. But I also think it's a message to senior leaders that this idea that, hey, if we just implement AI, we aren't going to need as many people. It is not true. It's just not true. And I think any of us can relate to that on the level of, we can all think about the times where, I don't know, you have a day that's packed with meetings and a bunch of your meetings get canceled. Do you get to the end of the day and do you go, wow, what a relaxing day I had? I got all caught up on everything that I wanted to do. It was amazing. No, you still get to the end of the day and go, I didn't get the things done I needed to get done, and I'm still white. Why? Because things fill in the cracks. And that's what his example was really highlighting was, yeah, okay, AI is doing more of my coding, but I'm not any less busy. I'm not working any less because of that, which I, in some ways, think is concerning. And it ties to a historical trend. I don't remember what class I was taking, but I remember reading about history as the Industrial Revolution was kicking off, and how people were like, oh, by the whatever years, people are only going to be working 10 or 15 hours a week because and it's like, people are more burned out in 2024 than they have been in all of human history. And we have more technology and automation at our hands than we ever have. So this idea that innovation advancement is going to somehow free us up, and boy, we're just going to sit on a beach drinking Mai Tais. Like, history doesn't support it. Now, here's the other article I read that I think ties to this. For those of you who may be in an organization that you're feeling a lot of the heat, a lot of the pressure, we need to be moving forward with this AI. I did come across, and it was a slash survey study article type thing. It was on localnewsmatters.org. So I don't know that that's actually the original source for it. But what it was it was highlighting a survey or some research about how slow companies are to adopting AI and how much slower that's moving than anticipated. And, some of the examples of the things that came up in there, and I'm actually going to see if I can pull it up while I'm talking about it, was that the reasons for it. Okay, so I did manage to find it here. The reasons why it's slow is the biggest one was volume of data. 56% is one of the reasons, the biggest hangups. The hardware was right up there at 50%. Data storage, ability to capture data, like data, data and hardware were at the very top of the list. So as you went down the list, you started to see like, oh, it can, hallucinate. And, we aren't sure how it can protect customer and client privacy. And there's cybersecurity risks. Like those were still significant, but they were down in like the 30s. So it was interesting reading that article because it was like, most companies don't even have the infrastructure to support the evolution. And if you read the headlines, you go, well, everybody's on Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace. Don't they just have, Gemini and Copilot? Doesn't that just fix it all? And it's like, no, it doesn't. Like that fixes I have a chat bot that can help me draft an email or make my PowerPoint for tomorrow, but it's not necessarily, creating a AI assistant that is actually measurably helping me do my job. And even getting to that point, there's a lot of work. And this ties to some of the things that I said in the previous point, that lack of data, the data pain points, which took up a large majority of the barriers, they're significant. And it goes back to, in this live stream I talked about today, what's happening with AI in a lot of organizations right now is they've been operating off assumptions because things just worked. They happened. Quarter to quarter earnings happened, and we moved and things worked, and we rolled out a new initiative. We aren't even really sure if it works or not, but like things moved and things happened and we're making money, and so we're fine. And so a lot of assumptions were made. A lot of people just went off this stuff. Well, now AI is coming in and people are going, great, AI, help us do this stuff. And AI is not physically having this conversation with you. Well, maybe it is, but it's like, help you with what? It's like that thing. It's like, what thing? Right there. Okay. Like, how do you want that done? I don't know. Like the way they're doing it now. Well, do you have any data on how that's being done now? Don't we have a report somewhere? Well, we have 7 reports and the reports are all different. We're not sure which one's accurate. And half of what's in it doesn't describe what Bill or Jane have in their head that they just do. So AI, can you help with that? Well, I mean, not really. And it creates major resistance for organizations. And so for some of the folks who, like I said, I still firmly adhere to the fact that every job will be radically changed by AI. Every single job will be radically changed by AI. I don't back down from that one bit. Do I think it's going to be 2025? Everybody's job is going to be night and day different? No, even though that was in many cases what was being hyped up as, by 2025, half your employee base is going to be AI agents. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. It's going to take time. I think only when I looked at let me look back at it. It was like less than 10% of organizations even use Gen AI broadly. Now, granted, I guarantee if you were to dig into that data, that's, company authorized use of Gen AI. I think a lot more people than 10% are using Gen AI in their day-to-day activity. But in terms of company authorized, active, big enterprise use of AI, less than 10%. And that, I will tell you from being involved in research studies, I would say it's probably a fraction of that less than 10%. Because the companies who are promoting, yeah, we're totally using Gen AI, it's part of a marketing brand campaign, and there's a culture tied to it. And so you're going to have people who are saying they're using it because that's what you're supposed to say. And when you actually dig into so show me, where exactly is AI transforming your business? I would say it is probably far less than 10%. And so I guess that's some good news for folks. If you're feeling overwhelmed or stressed or feeling like, oh my gosh, AI is just taking over jobs left and right, it's not. And if anything, I have seen more and more companies actually pull back on things as we've come into the end of 2024 because they've maybe done some things and they've gotten burned. What I don't think is going to happen is what you sometimes see where people get burned, so they overreact and then they go back to we're banning AI as a whole. It's too ubiquitous now. There's no going back from this. And even things that weren't so ubiquitous or were super ubiquitous where we have, let's use the return to office example, where it's some companies are trying to go back to the office. It's yeah, look how that's going for them. I was going to include it in this today, but even Amazon's running into some major challenges with their efforts to say everybody must be back in the office. So it's kind of one of those things where once you cross a certain threshold, there's no going back. And I think we're definitely there with AI, but it's not moving at the pace that it was being projected before. So if you're stressed, nervous, overwhelmed by that, you can at least take, a little breath of fresh air. You've got some time to adopt and adapt and pick that up. But here's my warning. If you're one of those AI resistors who doesn't want to engage, who's I'm just going to deny this, stick my head in the sand and hope, be careful, because it is coming and it is disrupting things. And when I talk to people in organizations, it is, again, that's why I don't agree with we only use it across the organization, less than 10%. It's being used all over the place, just differently than companies recognize. And it is differentiating people and their abilities. So don't be a resistor to it. Just figure out, going back to the whole theme of this one, deconstruct what you're doing and then reconstruct it in a new and better way. Okay. Last one. I've got a short one after this one, but I came across multiple articles this week on the military and AI that have me just concerned, that I think we need to be weighing in on. And again, what role we can play in this, I don't know. I think it may boil down to how we choose to, vote. It may choose depending on your role. If you're in the military, if you have some of this, I know I do some advising for the military, and I'm very vocal about this. But there was an article about the U.S. military, and they're convinced they've invested well over $1 billion in AI and are firmly convinced that it is going to pay off. And when I think about how the military is thinking about AI and what they want to do with it, I have no doubt that anybody who invests in AI, if they do it well, and this is where I struggle with this one a bit, if you do it well, it's going to pay off. Now, there was an article on Futurism about how they're also, this is tied, the U.S. military is now testing out its AI-powered machine guns. And this is where it starts to raise, which goes back to what I said about Bill Gates, where AI is going to force us to start to have to think about these philosophical, ethical challenges in wildly different ways, because now the military is all in on AI in its transformation of military action. And we've got to wrestle with that, because I have lots of friends who are very pro-military, and I respect and appreciate every single one of the soldiers who has committed service to protect the lives of others. And I also am well-versed in history and just other cultures to see that what the U.S. military does is not always great. And it's not always keeping humans at the center of it. And I wrestle with that a lot. Because I love this country that I live in. I have so much respect for the military people that I know who are committed to protecting and serving. And I hold that intention. And I think this is where it's a both and. It's not a, well, what side are you on? So Christopher, are you anti-American, anti-military, or are you pro-America, pro-military? I'm like, I'm neither. I wrestle with this heavily because when I see what does AI success look like, you have to look at what metrics are you using to measure success. Is it lethality? Is it more effective termination of a target? Is it less civilian deaths in military conflict and combat? What are we using to measure this? And as I've been following all the conflicts around the world recently, and especially some of the recent rise of now Ukraine firing missiles into Russia, and you can imagine Russia's not real happy about that. And I start to think about, oh gosh, this is super complicated, really hard, high risk stuff that puts a lot of people's lives in jeopardy. And those are the kinds of areas that I get really nervous when we go gung-ho with artificial intelligence, because those are exactly the kinds of areas that artificial intelligence can be extremely dangerous. And so I think about, as I was reading about this, computer kill code with this AI machine gun of how do you even train AI to target and make a decision on when to fire on the air quote enemy? And how is it determining who the enemy is? And how is it determining when to take? There's just so much stuff. And when I was digging into this one, it's like the system is fully autonomous. And now, granted, I didn't have time to get into all the exact specifications of this gun and its application and its use and where will it be used? Is it on a defense type thing? Because I came across another article that, and again, don't quote me on it because I know it's one of those headline things, but it was there's robo dogs with guns patrolling Mar-a-Lago type of a thing. And you're like, of course it's designed to be inflammatory and I don't want to pour fuel on that fire. But I think about some of this stuff where it's AI moving around with highly lethal weapons and being fully autonomous. When you say fully autonomous, you mean you are trusting it to make life and death decisions. And I understand that this gets really complicated. And this is why I say I'm not coming in here going, ban AI from the military. No. Or get rid of the military. No. But I think this is going to open up some really new territory. And it's not that, to be clear, I'm also not stupid. I know AI has been going on in the military for a very long time. So, if somebody's like, oh, Christopher, you think this is brand new? I know it's not brand new. But moving into this fully autonomous state where we have deadly weapons that are independently deciding what targets they're going to take out, this is a layer of ethics and philosophy I don't know that we've really had to consider before. In the past, there was always a person behind that trigger. There was a person pushing the button. There was a person making the determination on where and when and how. And I know I'm being very careful how I talk about this because I know it can be a very divisive, hot topic as people get into some of the atrocities that have been committed by military forces across the board, including the United States. So that's the thing. If you are someone who just blindly says the U.S. has never done anything wrong, well, we might have another heated debate there because we can't just ignore what the U.S.'s role in some of the things that it's perpetuated over the years, even to this day. But I think this is now taking a new level to this because we're starting to have to wrestle through, okay, well, clearly the government and the Pentagon have said they are investing billions of dollars into this. They're on the market now saying we're fully invested in Anthropic. That's who they're backing. They're experimenting already with totally autonomous lethal weapons. And I think that's something that we need to tread delicately with. And I think if we're not careful, we may very much find ourselves in a situation that we don't know how to get ourselves out of. Because going back to some of the things I've talked about over the weeks, when AI makes a bad decision, who do you blame? And I think when you think about some of these really complex situations, in some ways, success can look like, well, it's AI's fault. It's not our fault. Don't get mad at us, XYZ country, because we decided to drop a bunch of, bombs or launch a bunch of missiles into your country by accident. And oops, we took out a bunch of hospitals and, civilian residences. That wasn't our call. That was our AI, and it was a mistake. And so we're just going to kind of deny it and say, sorry, we'll work on fixing that. And I think we got to be really careful about that. And I think we need to focus more attention on, how do we draw attention to this and make sure that we're being as ethical and careful about this as humanly possible, because this is where it's serious. I mean, I'm not saying it's not serious in other areas, but this is extremely serious. Warfare is not something you mess around with lightly, and not that you mess around with other stuff lightly, like, automating a physician. I mean, I get that's serious too, but when you're talking about potentially automating some of the most controversial activity that is high risk, highly situational, high levels of variability, like the military conflict has like all of the most challenging gaps, all of the most challenging problems that any AI would ever have to deal with. It honestly has some of the most challenging problems to overcome. And especially because of what I'm reading, where they want to use it, right? They're not looking at, using it to automate mundane tasks so that soldiers can be more strategic in some of this stuff. They're looking at it. And again, this goes back to, how are you defining success? If you're defining success by who's taking out more of the opponent, yeah, AI can help you do that. It'll do a really good job at it. But is that really what we're trying to accomplish here? So this one was tough for me because I've touched on it lightly a few times, but this week in particular, there were a couple major developments that had me going, this one doesn't sit well with me right now. And it's worth talking about. And again, what do you do about it? Well, I think that's going to depend on every single person who listens to this, and kind of say, well, what role can I play in trying to at least influence this in a positive direction so we don't end up in some catastrophic situation, and not just catastrophic for us. How do we make sure we prevent a catastrophe? How do we prevent a catastrophe from happening to someone else, even if we've, as a country, have deemed them our enemy? Like, that's not an excuse for bad behavior. And then we just write it off and go, whoops, well, you break a few eggs when you make an omelet. Like, it's not okay. All right. Well, let me transition off that and hit on a lighter note. This one will be relatively brief. I just thought this one was really funny. So there is a company in, where is it? It's a UK-based telecom company, O2. I came across this initiative where they have designed a AI bot named Daisy. Clever, very clever, because the way it's spelled is D-A-I-S-Y. Get it? D-A-I, Daisy. But they've designed this phone scammer bot to actually detect and then waste scammers' times with just complete nonsense. And I don't know, I've watched a few of these videos with my kids on YouTube of people doing this, where they intentionally insert their phone number, or their not real phone number, but their phone number, into these scammer databases so that these scammers call them, and then they just waste hours of their time. And they do it, so they can publicly expose them. They do it to learn their tactics. They do it, to try and combat this. And so I thought it was really interesting and entertaining that you hear this telecom companies going, well, why have a person waste their time wasting someone's time? Why not just let AI waste their time? And it can actually gather probably even more data than anybody else could, because, hey, whatever. and it'll adapt and do all this stuff. So I actually thought this one was kind of an entertaining one where I was like, good for you guys, O2, for doing this. Because if you haven't seen some of this stuff, it's pretty terrible what happens when these scammers just destroy the vulnerable. They rob them of everything they have, and they make them just feel I mean, honestly, look it up on YouTube. I can't remember one. And actually, it was funny. They collaborated with Jim Browning, who is one of these famous YouTubers and cybersecurity experts who actually specializes. And he helped design Daisy to dig into this and actually create this thing. Now, on the flip side, somebody could use the same technology to exploit. So it's not just, haha, we've won. I think this will continue to be something that we have to watch. But like I said, on a lighter note, I thought it was funny to think about some of these scammers who think they're about to get rich by ripping off some poor old, elderly citizen. And instead they have half of their day wasted by an AI bot that is actually tracking all their stuff and hunting them down so that they can face accountability. All right. That's what I got this week. I hope you found it helpful. And as always, please send me your messages. Let me know if there's anything I can do to make this better for you. But hopefully it challenged you, made you think deeper, and just brought some additional perspective to what's going on right now in this crazy, crazy world. With that, I hope you have a great one, and we will see you on the other side.